He grips my house keys with a smile that pretends not to be stealing, and the first thing I feel is the drag of cold metal across my palm, the way the ridges of the key teeth scrape my skin as he pulls them just slightly out of reach, as if testing how far he can go before I protest. Present tense makes everything sharper, the air in the entryway thin and cool, carrying the faint scent of cedar polish from the cabinet to my left. A strip of late-afternoon light slices across the hardwood, catching a curved glass reflection on the cabinet door, bending it into a warped shimmer that stretches as Adrian steps deeper inside. I watch him with a calmness I've learned to use as armor, observing the subtle control in the way his fingers circle the key ring, how he rolls it once, twice like a man considering ownership rather than returning borrowed property. His smile is soft, the practiced kind that threads charm through possessiveness, the kind he believes can wrap itself around my suspicions and smother them before they fully rise. Feels natural holding these, he says, lightly lifting the keys by a fraction, as though demonstrating the point. His voice is warm, but warmth without sincerity is just a mask with better lighting. I hold out my hand, keeping my tone neutral, asking for them back because I'm late for a call and need the office key attached, and when he doesn't immediately release them, something cold flicks through my chest. Just thinking, he murmurs, and the keys dangle between us, swinging once before he lowers them into my palm with a deliberate slowness that makes the gesture feel more like a message than a mistake. The glass reflection behind him widens when he turns his shadow, distorting its edges until it looks like a crack forming in a pane. I step past him, heading toward the mirror by the hallway closet under the pretense of checking my appearance, but really I'm watching his movements through the peripheral distortions of the reflective surface. He scans the living room with a quiet quickness, eyes moving from the shelves to the staircase to the hallway leading to my office, cataloging the layout like someone preparing for more than just a visit. The silence between us is thin, stretched tight over the tension he doesn't realize he's created, and the only sound comes from the soft clink of the keys settling against each other in my grip. "You should consider reorganizing," he says with a casualness so rehearsed it almost feels insulting. "If we're combining things soon, it'll help." He says we, but he means I. I let him talk because sometimes silence reveals more than interrogation. He moves toward the bookshelf, running a finger along the frame of a photo from 2 years ago, one where my smile looks unburdened, uncomplicated. "You've done well for yourself," he adds, turning the picture slightly before placing it back. "Not straight, never straight, just a hair off like he needs to leave a fingerprint on everything he touches." I breathe slowly, evenly, letting my thoughts flicker the way the reflection behind him does. He's been growing bolder, but this is new. This uninvited ease, this sense of stepping into my house, as if it's a stage set for him to rearrange. I walk to the window and pull the curtain aside, letting a sliver of harsher light carve across the room. The shift in brightness sharpens the contrast between him and his shadow, and for a moment the distorted reflection on the cabinet door splits into two faint silhouettes, his real body and its warped echo. He doesn't notice too focused on assessing, evaluating, measuring. "Venue called," he says, abruptly turning toward me. "They need a deposit update." The statement lands strangely like a line cut from a different conversation. I raise an eyebrow. "You handled that?" "Of course," he replies too quickly. "You said you were swamped." "I hadn't. Not about that. And the deposit was already finalized 2 weeks ago." The dissonance scratches at my attention, but I don't show it. I only nod slowly, filing the inconsistency away with the others he's been accumulating. Something about his posture changes, barely perceptible, but loud enough to feel. He steps closer, the soles of his shoes soft against the floor, and the glass reflection behind him extends toward me like an elongated warning. "We're almost there," he says in a voice meant to soothe. "Everything's coming together." But every time he says everything, it feels like he means everything of mine. I slip the keys into my pocket deliberately, creating the sound of metal colliding, and his eyes flick toward the pocket before he looks back up with his polite smile. That flick, tiny, almost dismissible, is the sharpest truth in the room. I move past him again, heading toward the kitchen, and he follows with that same casual proximity, the kind that teeters on the edge of entitlement. The house feels smaller with him in it, the space shrinking around the quiet certainty forming in the pit of my stomach. This is the entry point of something I can't yet name, but already recognize. At the doorway between the kitchen and living room, he stops and turns back toward the main hall, letting his hand rest briefly on the frame as though marking the boundary. His shadow stretches down the hallway like a spill of ink. "You know I'm here to help," he says, and the tone is soft, but the placement is calculated. I don't respond. Instead, I watch his reflection bend again across the tile, the light slicing his shape into warped angles, and it feels like the house itself is warning me to pay attention. When he finally steps away and walks deeper into the hall, he moves without asking, without checking, without hesitation, disappearing into the space with the kind of confidence that only comes from someone who already believes a thing belongs to them. The scene ends in a suspended quiet, the distorted reflection trembling on the cabinet like a pulse waiting for confirmation of a fear I haven't yet admitted aloud. Continue. I'm Sabrina Cho, 37, a corporate attorney living on the near north side of Chicago, and if I'd known how carefully I needed to guard my boundaries, maybe I would have noticed the small things sooner. Past tense takes the edge off the moment, but not enough to dull what I now see so clearly. On that particular morning, before anything had ruptured into undeniable evidence, I stood in my kitchen pouring coffee while the trembling key, a single bronze house key I kept separate from the main ring, lay on the counter vibrating almost imperceptibly from the hum of the refrigerator beneath it. I didn't pay attention to it, then didn't think the trembling meant anything, didn't imagine it would become the noir object, marking the early fault line in a story I still believed was stable. My mind was tangled in work emails and wedding timelines, toggling between deposit confirmations, guest list revisions, and a procurement dispute that had turned into an unexpected emergency. Everything felt manageable, if not slightly frayed. I remember adjusting the stack of folders on the counter, aligning them out of habit, trying to organize the day before it had a chance to organize me. I took a sip of coffee, stepped out of the kitchen, and stopped. A thin slice of glass reflection cut across the hallway tile, sharp and silver, an unusually straight line angled from the cabinet door. It was the motif seed, though I didn't know it then. A small distortion. A silent foreshadow. Something that should have told me to turn around and check the locks on my certainty. Adrian arrived 15 minutes early, knocking lightly, as though the gesture were polite rather than strategic. He always arrived early, never late, never asking, always entering as if time bent around his convenience. His smile warmed the doorway, the way soft bulbs warm an interrogation room, gentle, falsely reassuring. He kissed my cheek, slipped inside, with the comfortable confidence of a man who'd studied the house long enough to move through it without needing permission. I set my mug down, the ceramic clicking against the counter in a way that now feels like the first signal of resistance, and he noticed but pretended not to. "You're already working?" he asked, even though the folders were plainly visible. "It's been a morning," I said. The venue's invoice came through. "I need to finalize scheduling for the delivery setups." He moved closer, scanning the counter, not for coffee or breakfast, but for paperwork, always the paperwork. "You should let me help with that," he said. "You've got too much on your plate." The words were phrased like concern, but the tone sat wrong, too studied. I didn't hear the warning in it at the time. I only nodded and reached for my planner. He tapped the counter lightly. "We should talk about the house appraisals, too." That stopped me. "Appraisals?" "For the merge," he said breezily, like it was obvious. "Financial clarity before the wedding. Combining things early makes everything smoother." I remember blinking at him, the suggestion sounding logical on the surface, but subtly invasive in context. He leaned back against the counter, hands tucked into his pockets, giving the illusion of casual interest, while his eyes kept drifting toward the hallway, toward the office where I kept my files and financial statements. "We can discuss it," I said. Non-committal. Controlled. He smiled again, satisfied, in a way that made something inside me shift uncomfortably. He always took my neutrality as compliance. I see now that he counted on it. I walked into the living room, needing space, needing air, needing distance from whatever pressure had begun to seep into the kitchen. Adrian followed at a slower pace, scanning the room with a practiced eye, and I caught the faintest hint of calculation in the turn of his head. But again, hindsight sharpens what memory softened. "I've been thinking," he said, stepping beside me with his arms loosely crossed, "about how we're managing responsibilities. It's important we have full transparency. No walls." The phrasing scraped against me, no walls. It was a philosophy disguised as intimacy, a principle crafted to benefit him more than me. I didn't push back. I didn't want to fight before work. And so I listened, letting him talk, letting his words settle across the room like dust that seemed harmless until you looked closer and noticed what it was building toward. When he reached out and rested his hand lightly on my back, I kept my posture steady, pretending the gesture wasn't weighted. He commented on how beautifully structured my home was, the word structured used, the way someone in real estate might use it while envisioning property transfer documents. He drifted toward the bookshelf again, tilting his head to glance at the top shelf where nothing of value sat, nothing except the fact that he was checking. "You've done well," he said quietly, almost thoughtfully. "It's a lot to manage alone." "I'm not alone," I said. And for a moment the response was more reflex than conviction. He paused, watching me carefully as though taking inventory of my tone. Then he smiled, touched my arm in a way I didn't return, and stepped into the hallway as if drawn by an invisible thread. I heard the faintest metallic tremor behind us, the key on the counter shifting imperceptibly again, and something about the sound felt like a tiny alarm I wasn't ready to acknowledge. He stopped halfway down the hall, turning toward my office door. "I'd love to help you organize your paperwork," he said, voice mild, smile soft. "Paperwork. Always paperwork." I shook my head. "I've got a system." He chuckled like the idea amused him. "I'm sure you do. But merging lives means merging responsibilities." The phrase merging lives made something tighten inside me, though I didn't understand why yet. I stepped forward, closing the small gap between us, blocking his view of the office. "We'll talk about it another day," I said. His smile didn't falter, but something in his eyes cooled just for half a second, like a blade reflecting light before being sheathed again. He took a step back, raising his hands in a gentle, "Oh, of course" gesture. "Just offering," he said softly. "You know I'm here for us. Us." A word he wielded like leverage. The trembling key on the counter gave another faint vibration, tiny but audible in the quiet house, and I finally walked back to the kitchen to pick it up. When my fingers closed around the metal, it felt colder than it should have, the chill lingering longer than the physics of it made sense. I turned it over, studying it, as if the object itself held a message I was supposed to decode. When I looked up, Adrian was watching me from the end of the hall, half in shadow, half in light. Neither expression nor posture revealed anything overt, but the stillness around him. The measured waiting felt like a door closing on something I hadn't yet recognized as dangerous. And the last moment of the part settles there, the trembling key cooling my palm, the thin glass reflection slicing the hallway floor, and Adrian standing inside my home like a man preparing to claim something he hadn't earned but already believed was his. The memory settles into place with the slow, deliberate weight of something I should have questioned sooner. Past tense grants me distance, but not enough to mute the unease that threads through this moment, standing in my narrow home office under the stuttering pulse of a flickering bulb. That bulb becomes the noir object for this part, an unreliable light that casts shadows in uneven intervals across the room. Each flicker seems to choose what I'm allowed to see, illuminating truth only in fractured flashes. I remember telling myself it was just old wiring. Now I know better. Nothing in that room was flickering by accident. I had stepped inside to sort a few documents before a client call, expecting a routine afternoon, expecting stability. The shelves hugged the walls, holding casebooks, tax codes, procedural manuals, comforting anchors that had never betrayed me. My desk sat beneath the bulb papers arranged in tidy stacks, every file clipped and labeled, every detail exact. It was the one room Adrian rarely entered, and the fact alone should have made me examine why he avoided it. Control thrives where observation is minimal. I began with the most mundane task, sorting mail. The envelope slid easily beneath my fingers. Utilities statements, the kind of predictable paperwork that builds the quiet architecture of a life lived responsibly. Then I reached a white envelope with no return address. The paper felt slightly thinner than the others, as if it had been handled more times before reaching me. I opened it without thought, expecting junk mail, and instead found evidence number 1, a partial bank slip. At first glance, it looked familiar, the way anything with a bank header looks familiar. But then I saw the timestamp printed cleanly, but unmistakably, a time I knew I was at work. And beneath the timestamp, the last digits of the account number, my account number, followed by a deduction I had not made, a number that didn't match anything in my budgeting logs. A hollow pressure formed in my chest, not fear, not yet. Something quieter, recognition trying to surface. I held the slip closer, the bulb above me blinking again. When the light snapped back on, it caught the edge of the paper, sharply creating a thin glint like a blade along its side. I turned it in my fingers, reading the details again and again, searching for any sign it wasn't real. Then Adrian's voice drifted down the hallway. "Hey, you in there?" He always had timing too precise to be coincidence. He appeared in the doorway a second later, wearing the same practiced smile he used whenever he wanted to read my expression. He leaned lightly against the frame, casual, unhurried, and the shadow behind him stretched long across the floor, warped each time the bulb overhead flickered. Sorting the mail, he asked as if it were a conversation we had often. His eyes flicked to the slip in my hand, and then too quickly back to my face. A controlled movement, a short-range scan. "Yes," I said evenly, "just catching up." "What's that one?" His tone was gentle, curious in the way someone might ask about an interesting trinket, not important enough to demand, but important enough to note. I folded the slip subtly with my thumb. "Statement error," I said. "Probably nothing." He stepped closer, and the bulb dimmed again, plunging the room into a moment of soft dark. When the light snapped back, he was beside me, the glow carving a line along his jaw. "Clerical errors happen all the time," he said, his voice honeyed smooth. "Banks mess up constantly. Want me to look?" "No." The word came out faster than I intended. Firm. Too firm. His eyebrows lifted slightly, the first crack in his manufactured ease. "I'm just trying to help." I slid the slip into the top drawer of my desk. His eyes tracked the movement not openly, but through the faint shift in his focus, the subtle tightening around his gaze. I recognized that look later, as the look of someone mapping access points. He leaned on the edge of the desk, close enough that I could smell the faint cologne he wore, the one that blended just enough with my space to make it feel like he'd already made a claim. "We should finalize things soon," he said. "Transparency makes everything easier." The word transparency scratched at me. The same word he used when talking about merging finances, sharing access, combining responsibilities. He used it the way a locksmith uses a pick, delicately, insistently, until the lock yields. What kind of things, I asked. My voice stayed neutral. My pulse did not. Everything he said simply. "It's what couples do when they're serious." The bulb flickered overhead again, briefly plunging us into a shallow shadow. When the light reappeared, the reflection in his eyes had changed darker at the edges, hungrier in a way I didn't yet have language for. He straightened, brushing his hand along the back of my chair, not affectionately, but evaluatively, and stepped toward the doorway. "We can talk after your call," he said. No rush. But there was rush. The rush was in the way he glanced once more at the drawer where the slip now rested. The rush was in the way his footsteps paused outside the office, as though listening to whether I opened the drawer again. The rush was in the way my thoughts spun, quietly registering how his expression had tightened when I said no. When he finally walked downstairs, his steps slowing just a fraction, I pulled the slip back out and looked at it again. The details didn't change. The deduction wasn't small. And it wasn't mine. The bulb flickered a final time, buzzing faintly, and in that fractured pulse of light, I felt something shift, a hairline crack forming between trust and truth. The part ends with me sitting beneath that unsteady light, the bank slip held tight in my hand, realizing that this single piece of paper had the potential to unravel every assumption I'd built my engagement on. Past tense settles over this memory, but even with distance, I can still feel the sharp divide that ran under the entire evening, like a tension wire pulled too tight. The public scene rule demands exposure under witness conditions, and that night delivered exactly the kind of collision I didn't yet know I was walking into. The cold doorknob becomes the noir object for this part, and I remember the exact temperature of the metal when I reached for it, far colder than the evening warranted, cold enough to make me hesitate with my hand still wrapped around its surface. It was a brief pause, nothing more, but now I see that I was already bracing myself without understanding why. The restaurant Adrian chose was a place with dim amber lighting and narrow brass fixtures that threw long shadows across the walls. Every table was set with wine glasses that caught the overhead bulbs in fractured highlights, and the entire space felt like a stage built for social grace, smooth surfaces, quiet forks, curated warmth. My mother, elegant but stern-faced, had arrived before us, sitting near the window with her gloves neatly folded beside her. She smiled when she saw me, a soft smile that softened further when she saw Adrian trailing 2 steps behind, carrying all the charm he knew she expected. We hadn't even sat down before I spotted Daniel Ruiz at a back table, my co-worker leaning over his laptop and nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee. His presence wasn't planned, but his timing was perfect witness energy, threading itself into the scene before any of us realized how necessary it would become. He gave me a quiet nod, and I returned it thinking nothing of it yet. Adrian pulled out my chair with an exaggerated gentleness, a gesture my mother interpreted as old-fashioned courtesy. I caught the flicker of approval in her eyes and felt a faint pressure in my chest. That pressure grew when he placed a hand on my shoulder as he sat down, gripping for just a second longer than necessary, leaving his touch like an invisible signature on my skin. Dinner began smoothly, as these things always do when a relationship still wears its public mask. My mother asked questions about wedding colors and menu selections, and Adrian responded with all the polished warmth he had perfected over the past year. He laughed easily, gestured broadly, showed exactly the right amount of affection, and never once slipped until he did. When Daniel approached to say hello, during a pause in the conversation, Adrian's smile held the faintest edge of stiffness barely perceptible unless you knew him well. He didn't like unplanned variables. He didn't like outside eyes. Daniel greeted my mother respectfully, then leaned in slightly toward me and lowered his voice just enough so only I could hear. "Did you see the email I sent? The one with the reference ID that became evidence number 2 the moment the words left his mouth. Not the email itself, but the timing, the delivery, the fact that he mentioned it here within earshot of my mother and Adrian. It pinned itself into the evening like a thumbtack holding tension in place. My pulse tightened. "I did," I whispered back. "Good," he said. "It didn't match what he told you last week, so I thought you'd want to know." I nodded slowly, my expression neutral, and Daniel stepped away without explaining further. He didn't need to. The reference ID corresponded to an email chain proving Adrian had scheduled a meeting on the exact day he claimed he was out of town helping Marcy. It was a timeline fracture small on its own, but deadly in context. I felt Adrian's gaze before I looked at him. He'd been watching us. His smile stayed in place, but his eyes had cooled into that hyper-focused calm he used whenever he sensed a variable slipping out of his control. "What was that?" he asked lightly once Daniel was gone. His tone was soft, but its edges pressed hard. "Work," I said, cutting into my salad. "Nothing urgent. Work during dinner." He chuckled as though amused, but he wasn't amused. He was circling, assessing. "It happens," I said. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice to a tone meant only for me. "You seemed laser-focused on whatever he said, and there it was, his attempt to pry without appearing to pry." My mother's presence forced him to soften his expression, but his eyes kept drifting toward the hallway where Daniel had disappeared, like he could retrieve the conversation if he stared hard enough. Dinner carried on under a veneer of civility, but the tension under the table was thick enough to feel like another guest seated with us. Whenever my mother asked a question, Adrian answered with grace and confidence. Whenever she looked down at her menu, he shifted his focus back to me, studying every small reaction, waiting for a misstep. Halfway through the meal, he excused himself to take a call. He walked down the narrow hallway to the restrooms lit by overhead fixtures that created alternating shadows, breaking his silhouette into segments as he moved. The fractured light made him look like he was flickering solid, then ghosted, then solid again. I watched him disappear behind the frosted door. A minute later, Daniel caught my eye across the room. He made a small gesture with his hand, just a subtle tilt of his phone, nothing overt, and I understood immediately he had more information. He had something that deepened the timeline mismatch. My mother spoke softly beside me. "Is everything all right, Sabrina?" I nodded. "We're fine." But we weren't. And the tremor in that answer wasn't lost on her. Her gaze shifted slightly, the kind of micro-observation only mothers and investigators excel at, and I could feel her attention sharpening. When Adrian returned, his smile was too bright, too polished. The smile of a man trying to re-enter a scene with composure he wasn't sure he still had. "Everything good here?" he asked lightly. I met his gaze. "Of course." He sat down, but the calm didn't settle back into him. He watched me more closely now, his eyes narrowing subtly whenever I lifted my water glass or checked the time. The atmosphere tightened, like a wire pulled between us. My mother attempted to revive the conversation, but it faltered under the weight of something she sensed but couldn't name. Adrian kept responding politely, but every sentence was slightly off, a half-beat, too quick or too measured. His hands moved more than usual, gesturing lightly as he spoke an old tell he used when he was calibrating the temperature of a room. By dessert, the dynamic had shifted completely. The air felt brittle, charged, and every shadow cast across the table looked sharper than before. Adrian's attention kept darting toward the entrance, toward Daniel, toward anything that might threaten his narrative. The part ends as we rise to leave, and Adrian places a guiding hand on my back, a gesture that would have felt affectionate months earlier, but now feels like a reminder that he's trying to stay one step ahead. The cold doorknob waits for me again as we exit, and when I wrap my fingers around it, this time the chill feels like a warning I can no longer dismiss. Past tense wraps around this memory, like a thin layer of dust, softening the edges just enough to make it bearable, but not enough to make it any less clear. If part 4 was the public crack, then part 5 was where the silence inside my home became charged with a different kind of danger, quiet, interior, intimate. The half-open drawer becomes the noir object of this part, and even now I can see it, a thin gap carved into the bedroom's stillness, the drawer pulled out exactly 1 inch imprecise in a way I would never leave behind. I hadn't noticed it immediately. I'd come home late after a long meeting, the restaurant tension still simmering beneath my skin, thick and unresolved. I dropped my bag by the dresser, kicked off my shoes, and only then did the half-open drawer catch my peripheral vision. It looked like a mouth that had started to speak and then changed its mind. It looked like hesitation. It looked like trespass. I approached it slowly, running a hand along the edge of the dresser. Something in the air felt disturbed, as though someone had exhaled in the room long after leaving it. My mind ticked through possibilities. Did I leave it open? Did I pull something out in a rush earlier? Did the wood swell? All excuses, none convincing. I opened the drawer fully, and the arrangement confirmed my instinct. Someone had touched my things. My makeup bag was shifted to the left. My small velvet pouch of old jewelry was unzipped, the edges of the zipper teeth in positions I would never leave them. A folded scarf I rarely wore was moved to the top of the stack, even though it lived at the bottom. And beneath the scarf was my planner. That detail stopped me. My planner wasn't kept in the dresser. It never had been. I pulled it out slowly as though expecting it to sting. When I opened it, several pages appeared slightly curved, like they'd been pressed down at awkward angles, and tucked inside neatly, deliberately, was a screenshot printout. Evidence number 3. Marcy had sent it earlier that day, claiming it was a silly mistake, oops, wrong attachment, LOL. But nothing about Marcy's doe-eyed warmth had ever quite matched the restless flicker in her expression. The screenshot showed a message thread with Adrian confirming an appointment on a date he told me he spent with her out of town. In her rushed attempt to explain, she mentioned she must have mixed up days, or maybe Adrian forgot something, he's so scatterbrained. Scatterbrained was not the word for Adrian, not ever. The moment I held the screenshot, the drawer behind me creaked a fraction, settling into its frame like a breath being pulled in. It startled me, not because it moved, but because the sound synchronized with the realization that this wasn't about disorganization. This was a search. My phone buzzed. Adrian. Calling. Again. I didn't answer. He arrived 20 minutes later without announcing himself. Not knocking, not texting, just letting himself in with the confidence of someone who felt licensed to access my world. Babe, he called. His voice drifted up the stairs. You home? I stayed in the bedroom, standing still. The screenshot in my hand, the drawer still open as evidence of what he'd been doing. I wasn't ready to confront him, not then, not yet. But I wanted to see how he handled the atmosphere. I wanted to see whether he recognized his own trespass. When he reached the bedroom doorway, he wore the same warm smile he used to diffuse tension. He stepped inside, scanning the room with a quick glance. The barest flicker crossed his eyes when they landed on the drawer, but he masked it so quickly I might have imagined it if I didn't already know better. Long day, he asked, setting a grocery bag on the bed, as though he were presenting an offering. I thought I'd make dinner. He didn't ask why the drawer was open. He didn't comment on it. He didn't need to. The silence around it felt like a shared secret we weren't acknowledging. I closed the drawer with a soft push. You were here earlier, I said quietly. He paused. What makes you think that I didn't answer? I didn't have to. The room spoke for me, my planner out of place, my things rearranged with the precision of someone looking for something. He gave a small, gentle laugh. You're stressed. You're overthinking. I held up the screenshot. Marcy sent this. His expression didn't crack, but something underneath it tightened, like a muscle preparing for impact. What is that? I watched him too closely to miss the way his eyes tracked the paper instead of me. A date you said you were with her, I said. A date you weren't. He stepped closer. Hands raised slightly, palms open, the performative gesture of a man trying to radiate sincerity. She must have sent an old screenshot. You know how disorganized she is. I did know, but Marcy wasn't sloppy. She was theatrical. And theatrics leave trails. I lowered the screenshot, but didn't let my expression soften. He moved toward me, placing his hands on my arms lightly, as though trying to reframe the moment physically. Let's not jump to conclusions, he said. There's always an explanation, always a form of control. But the room felt different now. The drawer, the screenshot, the tension in his posture, they weren't isolated incidents. They were the structure of a pattern revealing itself brick by brick. He tried to kiss my forehead, but I stepped back. His smile dropped for a fraction of a second, the briefest glimpse of the frustration he kept hidden behind polished warmth. Don't do that, he said softly. Don't start doubting us. Us. The word felt like a rope tightening. He left the room to put the groceries away, but the shift in the air remained long after his footsteps faded down the hall. The part ends with me opening the drawer again, staring at the empty space where trust used to live, realizing for the first time that the fracture in this story wasn't small, it was widening. Past tense carries this memory like a blade wrapped in tissue paper, thinly buffered, but still sharp enough to cut the moment I touch it. The noir object for this part is the metallic shadow born from the harsh angle of my desk lamp slashing across the chrome pen holder on my office desk. That thin, stretched shadow becomes a visual echo of everything in this chapter, distorted, doubled, untrustworthy. By the time I reached my office that evening, the air in the house felt heavier than normal, not tense-weighted, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I slid the door shut behind me, not slamming it, not rushing, simply creating a boundary between what I needed to understand and the man pacing downstairs pretending to be calm. The glow from the lamp was narrow and sharp, dividing the desk into two clean halves, light and dark. And as I sat down, the motif echo waited for me embedded in the way, the reflection on the desk fractured into twin shadows, a distorted pair, a split truth, a warning I wasn't ready to interpret the first time I saw it. I opened my laptop to look at a shared document Adrian and I had been updating for wedding logistics. He insisted on using a shared drive transparency he'd said. I believed the word then, unaware that, like everything he said, it was a strategically placed mask. The moment the file loaded, something in my stomach dropped. The history log blinked with entries, edits, timestamps, one in particular, a modification made at 2:17 p.m., the exact time he had sworn he'd been across town working on a vendor errand for me. Evidence number 4, a timestamp glitch that was not a glitch at all, but a truth flickering through his lies like a pulse escaping a corpse. I stared at the screen, then at the twin shadows on the desk, then at the screen again. The shadows bent along the metallic penholder, creating two elongated silhouettes, one clear, one warped. The duality was unmistakable, just like his stories. The memory moved slowly here, like watching myself from outside my own body. I picked up my phone not to call him, not to confront him, but to test something. A hypothesis. "Where are you?" I texted. His reply came instantly. Too instantly. Still finishing up across town. "Why need anything?" A lie typed with the speed of a habit. I typed back, "Just checking." My fingers hovered over the keyboard, the truth settling into my bones like cold water sinking through fabric. I clicked deeper into the revision log. More timestamps, more contradictions, a string of edits that didn't match his explanations. Small things. But small things make patterns. Finishing up across town, and yet the file showed him editing logistics from my own Wi-Fi network. My network. My home. He had been in the house. Here. Exactly when I wasn't. The air in my office tightened. The metallic shadow shifted slightly as I leaned back and the fractured reflection stretched, splitting my silhouette into two thin threads. I knew without knowing how I knew he had used the shared document as a cover, a pretense, a way to access my system, test boundaries, test reactions. I called him not to confront him, but to hear his voice while staring at the evidence. He answered on the first ring. "Hey, everything okay?" His voice was smooth. Too smooth. Like he'd been rehearsing. "Where are you exactly?" I asked, steady and neutral. "Just left the flower place?" His tone flicked upward at the end, a light performative rise meant to soften suspicion. "Why?" "There was a glitch in the shared doc," I said. "Your edits popped up with a weird timestamp." "A glitch?" "Yeah, that happens sometimes," he said immediately. Too immediately. Probably the server. Or maybe your clock's off. The lamp flickered. The twin shadows warped again. "My clock isn't off," I said. He paused. "Just a beat." But the beat was all I needed. "Maybe it synced wrong," he offered. "You know how inconsistent these systems are." He was still talking, words spilling in manufactured reassurance, but I wasn't listening anymore. Because once you hear a lie at the right volume, everything else becomes background noise. I closed the laptop and rested my fingers on the edge of the desk, feeling the slight tremor in my pulse. A tremor that matched the way the metallic shadow shivered under the lamp's uneven glow. My office felt suddenly smaller, claustrophobic under the pressure of the truth. He wasn't across town. He never had been. He had been here, inside my home, inside my files, inside the architecture of my life in ways I hadn't authorized, hadn't noticed, hadn't protected. And the worst part wasn't the intrusion. It was the ease with which he lied about it. "Do you want me to come back?" he asked, his voice soft, coaxing. "No," I said quietly. "Stay where you are." A lie to match his, but mine came with a purpose, information, not manipulation. He softened immediately. "Okay. Call me if you need anything. Love you." The words hit the air wrong, flat, mechanical. A line in a script he performed for my benefit, not an emotion he felt. I hung up without returning them. The metallic pen holder gleamed under the lamp, its two shadows splitting across the desk, one long one broken. And something in me clicked into alignment. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't carelessness. This was strategy. The timestamp didn't glitch. The light did. The shadows did. He did. The part ends with me staring at the fractured twin shadows, realizing they were the perfect metaphor for him, one version shown, one version concealed, and the truth flickering somewhere between them, waiting for the moment I'd finally stop ignoring it. Past tense folds itself around this memory like a hand closing over a match, containing the flame, not extinguishing it. By the time this part of the story began, I was no longer dealing with intuition or suspicion. I was dealing with patterns, ones that held shape, ones that bled truth, even when he tried to cauterize the edges. The noir object for this chapter is the paper edge, a thin sliver of white, cutting across an envelope Marcy claimed she just wanted to drop off. The edge caught the light like a warning, a delicate blade placed between intent and exposure. She showed up early that morning with a smile stretched so wide it looked brittle. Her blonde curls were tucked behind one ear, her coat draped over her arm like she planned to stay only a moment. But her eyes moved too much. They scanned my living room, my staircase, the hall leading toward the office, quick darting movements she probably thought were subtle. They weren't. Just checking in, she chirped, holding out the envelope. A few notes about seating arrangements, the usual nonsense. But nothing about Marcy was ever the usual when Adrian was involved. The envelope felt too light, too empty, too staged, and the paper edge sticking out of the flap shimmered under the morning light in a way that made my skin prick. I didn't open it yet. I didn't need to. Motives reveal themselves even before their contents do. "Come in," I said, stepping back. She hesitated. Just a moment, the delay of someone who wanted to see more but knew she shouldn't ask. Then she entered, her eyes flicking again toward my office with the subtle hunger of someone who knew what she was looking for, or what someone had told her might be there. "I hope I didn't catch you at a bad time," she said. "You didn't," I replied. "I'm just sorting things." Sorting. Her tone rose slightly, a half-question wrapped in curiosity, wrapped in performance. She was trying to probe lightly, carefully, without appearing to. I motioned toward the couch. She didn't sit. "Adrian said you were feeling overwhelmed," she said with forced sympathy. "He worries, you know." There it was, her opening move. Always soft, always coated in concern that tasted like too much sugar. I kept my face unreadable. "Did he?" I asked. "Oh, yes," she said, adjusting a stray curl behind her ear again. "He said the finances were getting complicated, that you'd been stressed." A small hum rose from the hallway behind us, the building inhaling heat, and for a moment the house felt aware, listening. "I'm managing fine," I said, "finances included." She blinked twice. "Too fast." "Of course," she said. "Of course. I didn't mean well, you know." But she did mean. She always meant. Her gaze drifted toward the stairs again, and that tiny slip, barely a flicker, cracked the veneer. She was here for a purpose, and it wasn't seating arrangements. I broke the silence by lifting the envelope. "Why don't we take a look?" Her breath hitched almost imperceptibly. She recovered quickly, but the damage was already done. I slid a finger under the flap. Inside was nothing but a single folded sheet. Blank. Virgin white. Not a seating chart. Not a note. Just empty paper. The paper edge caught the morning light again when I tilted it, gleaming like a signal flare. She swallowed. "Oh, that must be the wrong envelope." Of course it was. Wrong envelope. Wrong timing. Wrong visit. All staged. Before I could speak, footsteps sounded from outside. My next-door neighbor, Mr. Latham, walked across his porch on his way to load groceries into his trunk. He saw me through the window and waved. Then he saw Marcy, and his expression shifted into recognition. "Oh," he called through the open window. "Did your fiancé already head out again? I saw him leaving your place early yesterday. Must have been, 11. Didn't realize he was back in town." And there it was, evidence number 5, a witness statement, delivered effortlessly, accidentally, truth without agenda. Marcy's face paled for half a second. A full, unguarded second would have revealed too much, but a half-second was enough. She spun toward me with a laugh brittle as glass. He came back early. Change of plans, he's so spontaneous." "No," Mr. Latham interrupted with a friendly shrug. "He was definitely here until about 1. Saw his car in your driveway twice. Thought he was helping with the remodel or something." "Remodel," I repeated softly. Marcy froze. She shouldn't have. She should have laughed it off. She should have kept speaking. She should have redirected. But the fear in her silence leaked into the room like a slow, cold draft. I stepped closer to her, holding the blank paper gently between my fingers. "It's interesting," I said. "You told me he was out of town that day." "Oh, well, maybe I mixed it up." "And interesting that you're here," I continued with a blank envelope. Her throat bobbed. "I just wanted to help, with what I asked." She had no answer. She didn't need one. The truth was vibrating in the air between us like the trembling key had in part 2. "I should go," she whispered. Of course she should. She left quickly, almost stumbling on her way down the front steps. I watched from the doorway, the blank sheet still in my hand, the paper edge glinting like a thin blade of clarity. When I closed the door, the house exhaled. I walked into the living room, slowly sat on the edge of the couch, and placed the blank paper on the coffee table. A single sliver of sunlight stretched across it, turning the paper edge into a gleam of truth. The part ends there on the cusp of reversal, because I finally understood that Adrian didn't just have an accomplice. He had a strategy. Past tense holds this memory like a tremor suspended in glass, vibrational, delicate, and ready to splinter at the slightest touch. The evening arrived with a rainstorm that began as a whisper against the windows and escalated into a steady percussion, each drop striking the house like a coded warning I didn't yet know how to translate. The noir object for this part is the rain-wet coat sleeve, Adrian's sleeve soaked and dripping, when he appeared at my front door with a forceful knock that didn't belong to a man seeking shelter. It belonged to a man seeking entry. I opened the door slowly, letting the warm interior air meet the cold mist curling around his silhouette. His hair was damp raindrops clinging to the edges, and his coat hung heavy on him, water dripping in slow trails that soaked into my doormat. He looked like a man who'd rehearsed distress in the car mirror before knocking. He smiled wide-wounded, performative. "Rough night," he said, stepping in before I invited him. The sleeve brushed against my arm, cold enough to make me inhale sharply. Water seeped onto the hardwood floor, blooming into a small puddle that looked like a spreading bruise. He shook out his coat aggressively, droplets scattering across the entryway, and I watched them scatter into small reflective beads, distorted, misshapen, as though even the water echoing off him carried lies. "I've been worried about you," he said. "You've been distant." I didn't answer. Silence was more honest than anything I could have said aloud. He searched my face, trying to read what I wasn't giving him. Then he stepped deeper into the house, dripping, dragging the scent of cold rain, and something sharper, something like anticipation. I followed slowly, not out of trust, but out of strategy. I had a hypothesis. I needed confirmation. He shrugged off his coat with exaggerated heaviness, flinging the rain-wet sleeve onto the back of my chair. Water rolled down the wooden leg, forming a slow trail that clung to the grain. He ran a hand through his damp hair, pacing restless in a way that wasn't aligned with concern. It was aligned with calculation. "I hate when you shut me out," he said. "I never know what's going on in your head." That was the point. He kept pacing. The storm rattled the windows in low, intermittent thumps, faraway echoes of the truth about to break open. "I was thinking," he began, "maybe we should finalize some things before the wedding. Nothing huge, just logistics." The word logistics slid across the air with a familiar slickness. I didn't engage. I simply walked to the foyer table and picked up the folder I'd left there, deliberately placed exactly where he would notice it if he had come closer. A simple manila folder, harmless on the surface, but inside was evidence number 6, the unsigned prenup draft. He saw the folder. His posture stiffened for a millisecond before smoothing back into casual charm. "What's that?" I held it lightly. "Paperwork." "What kind?" He asked it with a tone meant to sound curious, but the strain crept in around the edges. I didn't answer. I opened the folder instead. The draft lay there, legal wording, crisp margins, perfectly aligned clauses, leaning heavily in his favor, joint access to assets allocation formulas that channeled control to him, vague language that read like benevolence but functioned like entrapment. And on the last page, the signature lines blank, waiting. His breath caught. "Sabrina," he said carefully, that's nothing. A template, a sample from work. But lawyers know the difference between a template and an intent. Intent lives in specificity, and this draft was surgically specific. "You dropped it," I said, my voice steady. "Earlier, the first night you insisted we reorganize finances." His face froze. Just a flicker. But in a man who prided himself on emotional choreography, that flicker was catastrophic. He shifted tactics instantly. "I brought that to show you the kinds of things people prepare before marriage. I was trying to be responsible, transparent. The same word he'd used while lying about timestamps, meetings, deposits. Transparent like murky water. He stepped closer. I stepped back. Rain trailed from his sleeve onto the wood floor rivulets, spreading like thin branches of gray. "I think you're being paranoid," he said softly. "You're reading into things because you're stressed. Not stressed, not misreading, connecting." He reached for my hand, but I didn't move. His fingers hovered a gesture meant to bridge distance, but it only widened it. "Why do you have that?" he asked again, voice lower now. "Why are you looking at it?" "You brought it into my house," I replied. "Did you really expect I wouldn't find it?" He inhaled sharply, jaw tightening. "This is ridiculous." I tilted the folder so he could see the clauses again. "This isn't ridiculous. This is preparation, and not for marriage." His composure began to fracture the cracks, visible now small shifts in his shoulders, his breathing, the angle of his eyes. His gaze darted toward the staircase, toward the office, the same way Marcy's gaze had flicked the day before. He was checking escape routes, checking access points, checking what he might still control. "That's not what this is," he insisted. "You're twisting it." The storm outside punctuated his lie with a low rumble of thunder. The lamp flickered. A shadow moved across his rain-darkened sleeve. The house itself felt complicit in revealing him. "You were going to ask me to sign this after the wedding," I said. Quietly, under the guise of clarity. He shook his head. "That's not true." But the sentence lacked conviction. It sagged under its own weight. "You planned it." I said each word deliberate. "Planned everything. I was trying to protect us. You were trying to acquire me." That hit him like a slap. He stepped closer. Too close. His breath carried the scent of rain and adrenaline. His eyes sharpened. "You're making a mistake," he whispered. "You're pushing me away when I'm trying my hardest to be a partner. Partners don't hide prenups designed to drain the other." "You should leave," I said. The storm seemed to grow quieter then, as though listening. His expression darkened. His mask slipped. His voice lowered into something cold. "I'm not leaving," he said. "Not until we fix this." "There's nothing to fix," I said, "except the damage you've done." He stared at me, and for the first time I saw something unmasked, something raw, unfiltered, dangerous. Not anger, not fear, entitlement. He stepped back a pace, chest rising and falling, scanning the room with desperate calculation, and I watched him realize something. His strategy was collapsing. His timeline was failing. His control was dissolving. "I came here for us," he said through clenched teeth. "No," I replied. "You came here for mine." His jaw locked. The rain-wet sleeve clung to him, water dripping onto the floor, in imperfect drops, each one marking the moment where illusion separated from truth. The part ends with him standing in the hallway, breath uneven, dripping onto the tile, and me holding the folder against my chest like armor, knowing with absolute clarity that the storm outside wasn't the dangerous one. The dangerous storm was the man inside my home. Past tense carries this memory with a cold, steady precision, like a documentary reel playing just slow enough for every detail to sink under the skin. By this point, the storm of Part 8 had already cracked through the last illusions. Part 9 becomes the forced choice chapter, the moment where doubt dies and decision is born out of necessity, not emotion. The noir object here is the faint audio recorder click buried inside the lining of my coat pocket, a small, almost imperceptible sound with the power to shift an entire narrative. But the real anchor of this part is evidence number 7, the overheard line, the sentence that removes ambiguity and converts suspicion into certainty. The cafe was quiet when I arrived, a narrow space with floor-to-ceiling windows that fractured the winter light into geometric strips across the tables. The chairs creaked softly when moved, and the espresso machine hissed in intermittent bursts like a creature exhaling. I chose a corner booth with a clear view of both the front door and the hallway to the restrooms, positioning myself the way I would in a deposition room, controlled, observant, prepared. When Adrian walked in, he shook off the cold as though shedding a performance from his shoulders. His smile was still polished, but thinner now, the edges frayed from the tension of the previous night. His coat was dry, pressed perfect, a stark contrast to the rain-drenched sleeve from Part 8. Masks, like fabric, can be replaced quickly. "Sabrina," he said warmly, sliding into the booth, "thanks for meeting me. I know last night was intense. Intense. A euphemism so delicate it sounded absurd." I nodded without agreeing. He leaned forward, trying to reclaim the emotional terrain he'd lost. "We've been under pressure. The wedding, work, expectations. People get tangled. But I'm here. I'm trying." The recorder in my pocket clicked faintly when I shifted my coat, a soft mechanical heartbeat. He didn't hear it. He never noticed small things unless they served him. "We need to talk," I said. "Yes," he replied. "We do." But before I could continue, he stood abruptly. "Let me grab a tea." "Back in a second." He placed a hand briefly on mine, too, familiar too claiming, then walked toward the hallway. I let him go. Because I had planned this moment. Because I needed him out of the booth. Because I knew with every cold inch of certainty inside me that men like Adrian grow careless when they believe a scene is under their control. I stood casually and walked toward the cafe's narrow hallway, moving just slowly enough, just subtly enough, to look like someone searching for a napkin or stretching her legs. The hallway had a bend that created a perfect acoustic pocket. Sound traveled there. Conversations carried. Statements didn't hide. I heard his voice before I saw him. He was on the phone. His tone was clipped sharp, frustrated the way he sounded when he wasn't performing. "No, listen," he hissed. "Once the paperwork clears, everything she owns becomes leverage. Leverage. Not love, not partnership, not future. Leverage." The word hit me like a pulse of ice. He continued, voice low but clear. "She's close to folding. I just need her to sign something, anything. And once the accounts align, it's done." My pulse didn't spike. It slowed, the way it does during cross-examination when the lie becomes undeniable. "She trusts me too much to see the strategy," he said. "She always has. Always. Past tense, habitual, a pattern, a method, a system." "I'll get it handled," he finished, "one way or another." He ended the call and stepped out into the hallway, straightening his coat, as though wiping fingerprints off a crime. I was already seated at the table, composed, back straight, breathing steady. Controlled detachment coated me like a second skin. He returned with a smile sharpened by false concern. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Have a seat." He sat, and everything in him, the charm, the warmth, the practiced intimacy, activated at once, like a defense mechanism triggered by threat. "You look pale," he said. "Are you all right?" I met his gaze with a steadiness that made him falter for a fraction of a second. "I heard you," I said quietly. "Heard me." His confusion was too fast, too ready. A man prepared to pivot. In the hallway I continued. "On the phone." The blood drained from his face. What do you mean I wasn't—" "Stop," I said. The word wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp. But it was final. He closed his mouth. And for the first time I saw him without performance, without warmth, without any of the soft, curated behaviors he used to manipulate the shadows around him. His expression flickered between panic and recalibration, searching for a narrative quick enough to salvage authority. "What exactly do you think you heard?" he asked cautiously. "I heard you call my life leverage." He inhaled, slowly, carefully. "This is a misunderstanding. I also heard you say you needed me to sign anything, Sabrina, and that once the accounts aligned, I said it would be done." His hand tightened on the edge of the table, knuckles paling. "You're twisting." I'm quoting. Silence fell between us like a sheet of glass, fragile and reflective. His eyes darted around the cafe, not for safety, but for audience. He didn't want anyone seeing him lose control. "What do you want me to say?" he whispered harshly. "That I'm scared, that I'm stressed, that I said something stupid to blow off steam? People vent. People exaggerate." "You weren't venting," I said. "You were planning." His jaw locked. The veneer was cracking too fast for him to patch. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand exactly what you're doing," I said. "Better than you realize." He leaned forward, too close, too intense. "You think you can walk away from this cleanly, after everything I've put into us?" "Into us," I echoed. "Or into what you wanted to take from me?" His silence was an answer. I stood up. He reached for my wrist. "Don't." I stepped back. "Don't touch me." For the first time since I met him, he looked afraid not of losing me, but of losing access. "I love you," he said desperately. "I'm trying." "No," I said. "You're trying to secure assets. Love never entered the equation." He paled, staring at me like a structure collapsing from the top down. I walked to the door. The recorder in my pocket clicked once more, soft, almost invisible, yet loud enough to mark the hinge of everything shifting. The part ends with the bell on the cafe door chiming behind me, and Adrian's voice calling my name, no longer warm, no longer careful, but stripped. Past tense returns to this memory, like a deep breath pulled through the ribs, slow, deliberate, necessary. By now, every suspicion has become certainty. Every fractured reflection has become a pattern. Every lie has become a data point. Part 10 is the breaking point, the unmasking the collapse of the architecture Adrian built from charm and manipulation. The noir object for this chapter is the dim lamp, its muted glow carving a small, isolated pool of light in an otherwise dark room. That lamp becomes the only witness I needed, besides myself, and the piece of irrefutable truth that arrived just before Adrian did, evidence number 8, the audio recording. The night was quiet after the storm, the kind of quiet that feels staged artificial. I was sitting in my living room when the message from Daniel came through a file attachment with a single sentence. "You need to hear this." I opened the audio. Adrian's voice filled the room instantly, confident, unfiltered, predatory in a way I had only sensed before. "She won't see it coming. Once the accounts merge, I'll have access to everything. It's a clean plan." My spine straightened slowly as I listened. "This is what marriage is," he continued. "Shared assets, shared power. She's too focused on the wedding to question the details." A pause, a chuckle. "And if she does, she trusts me enough that it won't matter." I didn't move. I didn't blink. I let the words saturate the room, let the dim lamp pull shadows across the walls like an audience to the truth. Then the knock came. 3 heavy consecutive hits on the door, each one more forceful than the last. Not urgent, assertive. A man insisting on presence. A man who believed presence still equaled control. I didn't answer immediately. I let him knock again. When I finally opened the door, he stepped inside without waiting, without asking, without breathing, it seemed. He had rehearsed his expression contrite, weary, wounded, but his eyes told on him. They were scanning, searching, assessing whether he still had room to maneuver. "Sabrina," he said, dropping his voice into the same soft register he'd always used to diffuse conflict. "Why did you leave the cafe like that?" I was worried. Worried. A word he wielded like a lawyer wields misdirection. I said nothing. I walked back into the living room. He followed, stopping in the center of the floor, his silhouette cutting across the dim lamp's warped glow. The limited light bent his features into strange angles, the man he pretended to be, and the man he was both hovering in the same frame. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Please." I gestured toward the lamp, toward the small pool of light where the audio file waited on my phone. "We can." He approached cautiously, sensing something had shifted but not yet knowing how much. His eyes flicked to the phone on the table. "What's that?" he asked. "A message I received tonight." "From who? A witness," I said. "Someone who heard you before I ever did." He stiffened. A ripple passed through his posture like a rope pulled taut. "What do you mean I didn't answer?" I pressed play. The room filled with his voice again, unmistakable, unedited, unmasked. Once the accounts merge, everything she owns becomes leverage. He froze. The dim lamp carved a thin, sickle-shaped shadow across his face. "She trusts me enough that it won't matter." His breath hitched once sharply before he tried to speak. "Sabrina, that's taken out of context." "No," I said. "That is the context." He opened his mouth again, shut it, opened it again. Words scrambled for formation. I was frustrated. "You don't understand how stressed I've been." "That wasn't stress," I said. "That was strategy." He shook his head. "You're twisting things. I never meant you drafted a prenup that gave you control over my property. That was a sample. You lied about where you were. You searched my room." His eyes flashed. Not fear. Anger. Anger at being confronted. Anger at being seen. "Sabrina, stop. You're blowing this out of proportion." "No," I said. "I'm scaling it correctly." He stepped closer, slipping into the tone of a man trying to take back space. "I love you. Everything I've done, everything I've said, it was because I wanted a future with you." The dim lamp buzzed faintly as if rejecting the line. "You wanted a future with my assets," I said. He inhaled sharply, and for the first time his mask cracked visibly. "That's not fair." "Fairness isn't the metric here," I replied. "Truth is." He exhaled through his teeth. "You think you're untouchable because you found a few inconsistencies. You think you can break off an entire engagement over misunderstandings. I'm not breaking off an engagement," I said quietly. "I'm ending a threat." His expression shifted fast. Sharp, venomous. His lips pressed thin, his jaw clenched. He looked at me, not like a partner, not like a man who'd been caught, but like a man whose plan had slipped out of his grasp. "You don't get to call this off," he whispered. "I just did. You owe me. I owe you nothing." He lunged forward, not physically but emotionally, pushing, crowding, trying to reassert the dominance he'd lost. "After everything I've invested, after everything I've done for you." "You invested in an opportunity," I said, "not a relationship." His nostrils flared. "Leave," I said. He didn't move. I said, "Leave." He stared at me with a look I will never forget. Cold, hollow, calculating, then slowly backed away step by step toward the doorway. He stopped at the threshold framed by the dim spill of lamplight. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "I'm correcting one." His jaw tightened, his eyes hardened. Then he walked out. The door closed behind him with a finality that felt less like an ending and more like a verdict. The part ends with the dim lamp flickering once its glow small, but enough to illuminate the phone screen, displaying the evidence, the proof that every shadow he cast had always been hiding the truth. Past tense drapes this memory in a thin, cold clarity, the kind that arrives when the fear has already burned off and only purpose remains. By part 11, the emotional battle is over. What follows is the payoff, the controlled strike, the execution of consequence. The noir object for this chapter is the mirror shard resting beside a stack of neatly clipped documents in the conference room, where truth is no longer whispered, suggested, or implied. Truth is pinned, fixed, stamped. It was early morning when I walked into the attorney's office, a place I'd chosen deliberately neutral territory, legal ground, a setting where facts are currency and performance dies on the table. The receptionist directed me to a private conference room, sunlight slanting through the blinds in clean geometric lines. On the polished table sat the shard of mirror, irregular, sharp-edged glinting, like a frozen sliver of the motifs that had trailed through the entire unraveling. Beside it sat a stack of documents I'd requested: property titles, banking protections, separation notices, revocation forms, and the cancellation contract for the venue. I placed my bag down and breathed once, deeply, fully. This was the first breath I'd taken without tension in weeks. Adrian arrived 5 minutes late, walking in with Marcy behind him, both of their faces stretched tight with feigned calm. But neither of them could hide the undercurrent of panic pulsing beneath their masks. Marcy clutched her purse like a lifeline. Adrian's jaw worked subtly, grinding back the frustration he was trying to swallow. "Sabrina," he said, adopting a soft tone meant to suggest civility. "What is all this?" "You know what this is," I answered. He tried a smile. "We can talk about last night. Things got out of hand." "This isn't about last night," I said. "This is about everything." The attorney overseeing the meeting entered, then a tall man with silver hair and an expression carved from impartiality. He nodded to each of us before taking his seat. "Let's proceed," he said. Adrian's eyes flicked to him, then to the documents, then back to me. "Proceed with what?" "This," I said, sliding the first packet toward him, the termination of engagement contract, one that ensured no legal or financial obligations remained between us. He stared at it as though it were a joke in poor taste. "You're serious?" "Yes. You're ending everything over a misunderstanding." I lifted my phone and tapped the screen. The audio file, evidence number 8, played loudly enough to carry through the room. "Once the accounts merge, everything she owns becomes leverage." Marcy flinched. Adrian's face drained of color. "Turn that off," he said sharply. "No!" The attorney raised one eyebrow. "Mr. Blackwell, this recording is time-stamped, geographically authenticated, and corroborated by multiple pieces of evidence Ms. Cho provided." Adrian swallowed hard. "It's out of context." The attorney looked directly at him. "There is no beneficial context for that statement." A beat of silence. He turned to me, then eyes sharpening into accusation. "You did this. You set me up." "No," I said. "You did this. I just stopped ignoring it." He leaned forward, voice dropping. "We were supposed to get married. We were supposed to build a life," I said. "Not a strategy." A muscle in his cheek twitched. His facade thinned. Marcy finally spoke, voice trembling. "This is all blown out of proportion. Relationships have bumps. Relationships, I said, don't involve financial reconnaissance." Her mouth snapped shut. The attorney slid form after form across the table. Notice of contract withdrawals, protection clauses, estate freeze confirmations, asset isolation directives, a final affidavit declaring the engagement void and the dissolution irrevocable. Each document landed like a nail sealed into a coffin Adrian had built for himself, plank by plank, lie by lie. "You can't be serious," he whispered. "I am," I said, "and you will sign everything." "And if I don't," he challenged. "Then I file all of this with the court," I said calmly. "I pursue financial stalking charges, document manipulation, intent to defraud, harassment, witness interference." His breath quickened. "You won't win," he said. "I already have," I replied. The attorney nodded. "The evidence is unequivocal." Adrian's gaze snapped to him. "Evidence." "What evidence?" I reached into my bag and placed each piece on the table in sequence, like cards in a game. He finally realized he wasn't equipped to play evidence number 1, bank slip. Evidence number 2, email reference ID. Evidence number 3, calendar screenshot. Evidence number 4, timestamp contradiction. Evidence number 5, witness statement. Evidence number 6, prenup draft. Evidence number 7, overheard line. Evidence number 8, audio recording. Marcy covered her mouth with her hand as the full chain materialized in front of her. Adrian stared, eyes wide, breath shallow. "Sign," I said. He hesitated. I leaned forward. "Sign or I file everything." And then the last of his resistance broke. His entire body deflated the posture of a man whose scaffolding had collapsed. He picked up the pen with shaking fingers. He signed. Each stroke of ink scratched across the room loud as glass cracking. When the last document was complete, he shoved the pen away, eyes burning with a raw, wounded fury. But it was not heartbreak. It was humiliation. He stood abruptly, chair scraping hard against the floor. "You'll regret this." "No," I said. "I'll recover from this." He stormed out. Not a backward glance. Marcy hurried after him. Silence returned to the conference room, heavy and clean. The attorney slid the mirror shard toward me. "Yours?" he said. I picked it up gently. It caught a thin slice of light from the window, bright, clean, unbroken. The part ends with me stepping out of the conference room into the bright corridor, the mirror shard in my pocket, and relief, true, unwarped relief, settling into my lungs for the first time. Present tense returns, clear and unflinching, because this moment, the aftermath, is not a memory softened by time. It is the now, the quiet final note, where the noise has finally burned off, where reflection becomes clean instead of warped. The noir object for this last chapter is cigarette ash, a faint gray remnant sitting in a small dish on my balcony table left from a moment earlier in the week when stress made me do something out of character. The ash is fragile, weightless, waiting to be brushed away, and in the morning light it looks harmless evidence of pressure, not of permanence. The house feels different today. Still mine, completely mine. No shadows stretched too long. No footsteps that don't belong to me. No soft knock that carries hidden motives. Just silence, the kind I choose, not the kind that hides a verdict. I stand in the hallway coffee mug, warming my hands, watching the strip of sunlight fall across the tile in a perfectly straight line. No distortion. No fracture. No twin shadow bending the edges. The reflection, my reflection, holds steady. The motif resolve arrives exactly where it should, a single clean line of light, running unbroken from one end of the hall to the other. For the first time in months, it is only one line, not two. I walk to the balcony and pick up the small dish with the cigarette ash. It weighs almost nothing. I hadn't smoked in years, but the night before the attorney meeting, I'd stepped out onto the balcony with a single cigarette, lit it, and let myself feel everything: anger, exhaustion, fear, clarity. I'd taken one drag, maybe two, then crushed it out, leaving the ash as proof that even the strongest structures bend under pressure. But pressure also defines metal, and I know which one I am. I carry the dish back inside and set it on the counter. The morning air is cool and the house smells like coffee and quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask questions. I check the locks, not out of fear but out of habit, and walk from room to room, noticing the details I hadn't been able to see before. The bookshelf sits straight, untouched. The dresser drawers are closed aligned. The office is exactly how I left it, the lamp off the metallic pen holder, casting no divided shadows. The reflection on the desk is whole now. One silhouette, one truth. My phone buzzes, a message from Daniel. Everything settled. I type back, "Yes, thank you." 3 dots appear, then disappear. He doesn't press. He doesn't pry. He respects boundaries, something Adrian never understood. I put the phone face down. On the table, the mirror shard from yesterday's meeting lies where I set it, its edges catching the morning light in a narrow beam. I lift it carefully. The shard reflects only me, unbroken, centered mine. I carry it to the hallway and hold it up to the sunlit tile. The beam splits across the floor in a single bar of brightness, aligning perfectly with the natural reflection the cabinet creates. There is no distortion, no second shadow, and for a moment, it looks like the house is exhaling with me. I know healing won't be immediate. I know trust of myself, of others, will rebuild slowly, brick by brick. But I also know this: I didn't lose anything. I kept everything that mattered. I kept my home, my car, my savings, my autonomy, my life, and I regained the thing he tried hardest to take without ever naming it, my certainty. I step into the kitchen, open the window slightly, and let a small breeze sweep across the counter. It lifts the cigarette ash just enough that it swirls soft and unanchored before drifting into the garbage bin. A faint trace, a fading ghost. a pressure that no longer exists. I close the window. The hallway is bright now. The light runs through it clean and even, like a boundary line redrawn by someone who finally understands where it belongs. I take one last look at the reflection on the tile. It holds steady, solid, singular. The story ends not with a twist, not with a confrontation, but with a quiet realization. Some men leave scars when they exit. Others leave relief. Adrian left clarity, and clarity once found doesn't tremble.